You are 34 years old and translating trade agreements for the European Commission when the call comes. Not the call that changes everything, that comes later, but the first one, the one that plants the seed. A senior attaché from the German Foreign Ministry asks if you would be willing to consult on a back-channel communication between two delegations whose official diplomats have stopped speaking to each other. The pay is 3 times your monthly salary for a single weekend. You say yes because you need the money, and because you tell yourself it is just language, just words moving between people who have forgotten how to talk. You are good at language. You speak 6 of them without an accent, and 2 more well enough to argue in. You grew up in Vienna with a Czech mother and an Iranian father who both worked in international trade law. And somewhere between their 2 worlds, you became someone who existed comfortably in the space between things, between cultures, between systems, between versions of the truth. You did not know then that this was a skill with a market. You did not know that markets like this one have no exit. The weekend goes well. The delegations reach a preliminary understanding. The attaché thanks you with an envelope and a handshake and tells you he will remember your name. You go back to Brussels and your apartment and your trade agreements, and for 3 months, nothing happens. Then a different man calls. He does not represent the German Foreign Ministry. He represents, as far as you can determine, himself, though you will later understand that men like him never represent only themselves. He knows about the weekend. He knows more than the weekend. He knows about your father's old business contacts in Tehran, about a paper you wrote at university on the geopolitics of nuclear non-proliferation, about a woman you dated for 2 years who now works in signals intelligence for a country you would rather not name. He is not threatening you. He is cataloging you. There is a difference, and the difference is that a threat can be refused. He wants you to carry a message. Not literally, not a physical object, but a communication, a position, a formulation of intent that neither side can put in writing, because putting it in writing means it exists, and things that exist can be discovered, and things that can be discovered become crises. He tells you the 2 parties. You go very still. He watches you go still with the patience of someone who has watched people go still before and knows they always start moving again. You ask him what happens if you say no. He tells you that you remain a trade agreement translator in Brussels, which is a perfectly good life, but that the conversation you are currently having will be remembered by people with longer memories than yours, and that being remembered by such people in such a way is its own kind of consequence. You ask for 48 hours. He gives you 24. You do not sleep. At 6 a.m., you call him back and say yes, and the life you were living closes behind you like water. The first trip is to a city you are asked not to name even in your private notes, which you will eventually stop keeping because private notes are a liability you cannot afford. You meet a man in a hotel restaurant over a meal neither of you eats. He is a senior figure in a technical ministry, which is the polite architecture through which certain governments house certain programs. You have been briefed on what he is allowed to hear, on what formulations will land correctly, on which words in which language carry connotations that will either build trust or destroy it before it forms. You deliver the communication exactly as constructed. He listens without expression. He asks 3 questions, which you anticipated 2 of. The third one you route back through your contact, the man who called you, who you now think of simply as the architect, and within 6 hours you have an answer, and you return to the table and deliver it, and something shifts in the air between you that you cannot name, but that feels like the first millimeter of movement in something enormous and locked. You fly home. You sleep for 14 hours. When you wake, there is a transfer in your account that is more than you made in the previous 2 years combined. This is how it begins. Not with drama, with logistics, with language, with the very careful placement of words inside other words so that the meaning arrives without the accountability. You are not a spy. You carry no weapons, run no agents, collect no intelligence in the operational sense. What you do is more specific and in some ways more dangerous. You translate not just between languages, but between systems of belief, between threat perceptions, between the paranoid internal logics of states that have spent decades convinced the other is planning their annihilation. You are the human infrastructure of a conversation that cannot officially occur. You are the reason two governments can maintain public positions of absolute hostility while privately preserving the millimeter of space that keeps those positions from becoming kinetic. Over the first year, you make 11 trips. You learn the rhythms of both sides, which of their officials are pragmatists and which are ideologues, which respond to security framing and which respond to economic framing, which require that their domestic political constraints be acknowledged explicitly before they can move on any substantive point. You learn that both sides have factions, and that the factions are not always aligned with the official positions you are carrying, and that sometimes your most dangerous work is not the communication itself, but the navigation of the internal politics that surround it. A message that arrives to the wrong faction at the wrong moment can do more damage than no message at all. You develop a sensitivity for this that you cannot fully explain, an instinct built from thousands of small data points, from the way a man's posture changes when a colleague enters the room, from the particular silence that follows a question that has touched a fault line.
The architect debriefs you after every trip. He listens the way surgeons listen to a patient's symptoms, not for emotion, not for narrative, but for the precise clinical data embedded in what you are saying. He asks questions that reveal he already knows more than you have told him, and you understand that you are one channel among several, that your work is being cross-referenced and calibrated against other inputs you will never see. You are not given the full picture. You are given only what you need to do your job, which is itself a message about what you are, a precision instrument, not a partner. You decide early that resenting this is a waste of energy you cannot afford. You focus on execution. The first serious crisis comes 18 months in. One side conducts a test, not a large one, a calibration, a technical exercise with highly specific parameters that the other side, reading it through their own threat perception, interprets as preparation for something more. Within 72 hours, the back channel you have spent 18 months building is in genuine danger of collapse, and with it, the thin membrane of managed tension that has been keeping the situation from escalating into something that generates its own momentum. The architect contacts you at 2 a.m. You are in your apartment in Vienna. You moved back from Brussels 8 months ago for reasons you told yourself were personal. You take the call. He tells you that both sides need to hear something specific in the next 36 hours and that no official channel can carry it because the official channels are currently being performed to outrage for their respective domestic audiences. You are the only mechanism available. You ask him what the message is. He tells you, and for a moment you sit with the weight of it, the precision required, the margin of error, the fact that a single miscalibrated phrase could remove the ambiguity that is currently protecting both sides from having to make decisions they cannot take back. You fly out on a commercial flight under your own name because operational cover is for people who are doing something their governments know about, and your situation is more complicated than that. You meet the first contact in a different city than usual because the usual city feels too visible right now. You deliver the message. He responds with something that is not quite acceptance and not quite refusal, a kind of conditional acknowledgement that contains within it a specific ask, a clarification, a request for a formulation that will allow his side to step back from their public position without appearing to have done so. You understand immediately what he needs. You call the architect from a payphone. You still use payphones for this, a habit that strikes some people as theatrical, but that has a practical basis you have verified, and relay the ask. The architect is silent for 11 seconds, which is long for him. Then he gives you a modified formulation and tells you that if the other side accepts it, you need to be in the second city within 20 hours. You go back and deliver the modified formulation. The first contact reads it, asks you to leave the room, returns 12 minutes later and tells you it is acceptable. You get on a plane. The second city, the second contact. You have worked with him longer than the first and trust him more, which in this environment means you understand his constraints better and have fewer illusions about his goodwill. You deliver the formulation. He is a precise man, an engineer by training, which means he processes language the way engineers process tolerances, looking for the load-bearing elements, looking for what will hold under stress and what will fail. He finds the one phrase that concerns him and tells you exactly why it concerns him. His objection is not political, it is technical, and it is correct. You call the architect again. The modification is made. You return to the second contact. He reads the revised formulation. He nods once, which you have learned means something specific with him, and the crisis begins, slowly, invisibly, in a way that will never appear in any newspaper, to deflate. You fly home. You are in your apartment for 3 days, and you do not leave. You are not frightened exactly. Fear implies uncertainty about whether something bad might happen, and you have moved past uncertainty into a more stable relationship with danger, a kind of chronic awareness that is the occupational baseline of this work. What you feel instead is the specific exhaustion of having carried something extremely fragile across an enormous distance without dropping it, and the knowledge that there will be no acknowledgement, no record, no moment in which anyone outside a very small room will understand what just happened or what it cost. This becomes the pattern of your life. You develop what you think of as a professional self, a version of you that exists inside the work, that is disciplined and precise and effectless in the way that the work requires, and you maintain it alongside a personal life that grows progressively thinner, not because you choose to sacrifice it, but because the weight of what you cannot say to anyone who is not inside the work makes normal intimacy structurally difficult. You have a relationship for 1.5 years with someone who asks good questions and deserves honest answers, and whom you care about enough to lie to consistently, which you eventually decide is its own kind of harm, and you end it. You tell yourself you will return to that part of your life when things stabilize. You understand, without quite admitting it, that things will not stabilize. By the 3rd year, you have carried communications on 9 separate occasions that touched directly on questions of weapons capability, on testing schedules, on the interpretation of satellite imagery, on the formulations used to describe what each side would and would not tolerate before the calculus of their decision-making changed in ways that could not be reversed. You are now negotiating treaties. You are not making policy. What you are doing is maintaining the cognitive infrastructure of restraint, the shared understanding of red lines, the mutual legibility of threat signals, the basic operating premise that the other side is a rational actor whose rationality can be engaged rather than an existential threat that must be preempted. This sounds abstract. It is not abstract. Every time you carry a message that preserves that premise, the alternative to it exists concretely, in megatons, in delivery systems, in the targeting matrices that both sides update continuously, and that you know enough about to understand that the mathematics of miscalculation in this domain does not leave much room for recovery. The moral weight of this accumulates in ways you did not expect. You anticipated the danger, the practical, personal danger of what happens to people who carry sensitive communications if the political landscape shifts and they become liabilities. You did not fully anticipate the ethical complexity of having influence without accountability, of shaping outcomes that affect millions of people without any democratic legitimacy, without any formal mandate, without being answerable to anyone except a man you did not choose and cannot fire. You tell yourself that someone has to do this.
You tell yourself that the alternative to imperfect back-channel communication is no communication at all, and that you have seen enough of what no communication looks like, the escalating misreadings, the worst-case assumptions, the way both sides fill the silence with the most threatening interpretation available, to believe that your work has genuine value. You believe this. You also know that believing it is partly functional, partly a psychological necessity for continuing, and that the line between genuine moral conviction and the story you tell yourself to keep doing what you do is not always clear. You are 39 now. You have been doing this for 5 years. The architect has been replaced once. Not dead, not compromised, just rotated, which tells you something about the institutional infrastructure behind what you once thought was a more improvised arrangement. The new one is a woman, younger than you expected, with a background in strategic studies and a manner that is more direct than her predecessors. She asks you questions the architect never did, not about your work, but about your read on things, your assessment, your interpretation. This is either a sign of greater trust or a different kind of operation, and you are experienced enough to know you may never be sure which. You work with her the way you worked with him, carefully, completely, with the controlled transparency of someone who understands that information is currency, and that you are both holding some. The current situation is the most delicate you have navigated. Both sides are in domestic political cycles that are making their leadership less flexible, more performative, more responsive to internal audiences that are demanding a harder line. The margin of space you work in, the gap between the public position and the private tolerable outcome, has narrowed. Carrying a message accurately is no longer enough. You have to carry it with a precision of timing and framing that accounts for the political weather on both ends, for the specific internal vulnerabilities of the figures receiving it, for the way the same words land differently depending on what happened domestically in the 72 hours before they arrive. You make mistakes. Not catastrophic ones, you are too careful, too experienced for catastrophic ones, but small miscalibrations that you identify in the debrief and catalog and build into your model. You are learning, always, in a field where the consequences of the learning curve are not grades or professional setbacks, but something that sits in a different category entirely. There is a message you are scheduled to carry next week. You know its general contours. You know it is important, more important than most. There is a decision point approaching on one side that will shape the political space available for the next several years, and the other side needs to understand something specific about how that decision point is likely to resolve before they make certain commitments of their own. The timing is tight. The formulation has been in development for 3 weeks, and you have been consulted on it, which is new, a development that you note without knowing exactly what it means. You are ready. You have been ready, in the way that you are always ready, which is to say that you have never stopped being the person who exists in the space between things, the person who carries what cannot be carried any other way. The person who knows that the conversation is more important than the conversationalists and acts accordingly. You do not know how this ends. You have stopped trying to imagine how this ends. What you do know is that next week you will get on a plane and you will sit across from someone who represents a government that would imprison you if your role were known, and you will carry a message that will either preserve something fragile or fail to, and the difference between those two outcomes will not be visible from the outside, will not be celebrated or mourned by anyone who does not already know, and will matter enormously regardless. You have made your peace with the anonymity of it. You have made your peace with most of it. You are still working on the rest.